Let's break down 3 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a quarterback, and tight end who are absolute must-starts going into Week 14 of the 2024 fantasy football season. These players have way too much upside. Their matchups are way too good, and they are set to go absolutely nuclear here in Week 14. So let's kick the video off with a player who made last week's video, and that is Bucky Irving of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I think at this point, Bucky Irving has solidified himself as a must-start player in your lineup every single week, but we get all kinds of questions here on the channel every single week. And going into Week 14, even with 6 teams on bye week, I'm still getting a lot of questions about Bucky Irving, but Bucky Irving is the definition of a must-start player for the remainder of the fantasy season. Now, he is dealing with that hip injury that he suffered returning that kickoff right before halftime in last week's matchup against the Panthers. So there's a chance he goes into this week listed as questionable. I mean, getting closer and closer to Sunday because he is listed as questionable right now. So definitely keep on top of that. That could open up a good day for my guy Rachaad White. But right now, I think Bucky Irving is going to suit up. He is expected to play this week against the Raiders, who have improved against the run, moving up to 16th against the position in terms of fantasy points allowed to running backs. But if you own Bucky Irving and he is healthy, he is good to go, he has to be in your lineup. He might be your flex. He might be your RB2, whatever it is. He's got to be in your lineup. He is absolutely dominating. He has 15 or more fantasy points in every game since Week 6, except for Week 9 against the Kansas City Chiefs, who are allowing the fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs. He has 27.2 or more points in 2 straight games against very soft run defenses, but who cares? He's absolutely dominating. If you own Bucky Irving, he is a lock for double-digit fantasy points. He has to remain in your starting lineup. Do not bench Bucky Irving going into Week 14. Next up, let's take a look at Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans, currently coming in as the RB23 on the season, averaging 13.6 fantasy points per game, but it's been a little bit up and down over the past couple weeks. Let's just look over the last 4 weeks: 10.3 points, 4.9, 21.9 against Houston, 8.8. So definitely has been a bit of a bumpy road. But if you are a Tony Pollard owner, the good news is things should get much better in the following weeks. He has one of the best, if not the best, overall strength of schedule for running backs for the remainder of the season. He gets Jacksonville this week, then Cincinnati, then Indianapolis, and then Jacksonville again in the fantasy championship. But here in Week 14, which is going to be a very crucial week for a lot of you guys securing playoff seeding, maybe securing a bye week in the playoffs, maybe just literally getting into the playoffs, maybe spoiling your league mate, even if you're not getting into the playoffs. If you own Tony Pollard, this is a smash start this week. We have started running backs left and right all season long against the Jacksonville Jaguars. That is not changing here in Week 14. I know it's been bumpy for Tony Pollard, but he still has only given you single digits 4 times in total on the season, averaging 13.6 fantasy points per game. He still has been really consistent. It's just been a little bit of an up and down road the past couple weeks, but they have faced some pretty good defenses. The Chargers, the Vikings. He performed well against the Texans, who are a good run defense, and then Washington this past week. So listen, I'm not in any way concerned about Tony Pollard. I think he's going to be much better to wrap up the season. The Titans kind of in this like mode where they're seeing what they got, right? With Will Levis at quarterback, what they're going to be going into next year. They're not technically eliminated from the playoffs yet, but they probably will be in the following weeks, right? But nonetheless, they're still going to be kind of fighting it out these past couple of weeks. So I like Tony Pollard a lot moving forward. But here in Week 14, due to this matchup, Tony Pollard's going to come through as a strong flex or RB2 option for your fantasy lineup. And we have been betting against this Jacksonville defense all season long, so I'm not going to stop this week. I'm taking Tony Pollard to score a rushing touchdown on Underdog against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Make sure, if you guys are new to Underdog, that you head straight to Underdog, sign up with the promo code that is down below. You guys can use that link. Promo code THECATCH is going to get you a free NFL Pick'em to use towards Week 14's action. Take your free Pick'em, pair it with Pollard to score a touchdown against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Once both of those lines hit, you'll automatically triple your cash entry. And on top of that, as long as you guys sign up with promo code THECATCH, Underdog is also going to give you a 50% deposit match up to $1,000. So that's a 50% deposit match that will get you up to $1,000 in bonus cash on Underdog and a free NFL Pick'em to use towards Week 14's action on Underdog. That's going to help you start off with an easy win when you guys sign up with the link down below and promo code THECATCH. And last but not least is James Cook of the Buffalo Bills, coming in as your RB10 on the season, coming off of a big performance in the snow against the San Francisco 49ers, where he had 19 fantasy points, 107 rushing yards, a touchdown, and added 1 reception for 13 receiving yards. He's currently averaging 17.1 fantasy points per game, and this is another good matchup on the road against the Rams, who are allowing the 23rd most fantasy points to opposing running backs. So, yeah, James Cook is basically locked in as a start every single week. But once again, I've gotten questions about James Cook going into this week. I had questions about James Cook going into last week. That may have been because he was coming off of the bye. I'm not sure what it is, but if you own James Cook, I mean, this is a lock in your roster every single week, a top 10 running back in fantasy football who's due for another one of these big performances. He's had 19 or more fantasy points in 2 straight games, 15 or more fantasy points in every game except for 1 since week 8. And I don't think that pace is going to slow down. I'm actually a little bit worried this could be a tough overall game for the Rams. And this might be close to another one of these like dominant performances out of the Bills as an entire team. And James Cook, kind of the heartbeat of all of that, right? And really the heartbeat of this Bills offense is the run game. James Cook, what Josh Allen can do with his legs. And now Ray Davis as well. So if you own James Cook, do not bench him whatsoever. He's due for another huge week here in Week 14. Let's move along to the wide receiver position. Let's talk about a wide receiver who made last week's video, and that is George Pickens of the Pittsburgh Steelers, who came through for you guys with 16.4 fantasy points, 6 targets, 3 catches, 74 receiving yards, and a touchdown. So he has kind of had these 2 kind of lower volume games, just 4 catches in week 12 in the snow, just 8.8 points in this past week. Well, he did come through against that awful Bengals secondary. He still only had 3 catches, but George Pickens has been phenomenal since week 7 when we first saw Russell Wilson take over at the quarterback position, right? He has that one kind of dud in the snow, but outside of that, he's had 11.4 or more fantasy points in every single game. You take away, week 8 against the Giants, where he had 11.4 fantasy points, and the snow game against the Browns, he's had 16.4 or more points in every single game. And the Cleveland Browns, I think you guys know by now, watching that Monday Night Football matchup between the Broncos and the Browns, this secondary is god-awful, and even before that matchup, they were very, very weak. I mean, we had Courtland Sutton in last week's video as well, because the Browns have been awful against opposing wide receivers all season long. Now, Denzel Ward has played pretty well against opposing wide receiver ones, don't get me wrong, but he still gave up a very good stat line to Courtland Sutton this past week. So you might see maybe limited touchdown upside this week for George Pickens. That is possible, but the targets, the receptions, all that is going to be there. And this is a home game for the Steelers. Take away whatever narrative you have based on that week 12 snow game. That's not going to happen this week. No snow, no, on the road issues, anything like that. The Steelers should be in a spot to bounce back this week. And I'm hoping, for the most part, we actually see these defenses bend a little bit and we get a little bit more of what we got this past week in that Monday night game for the Browns and what we got on Sunday between the Bengals, and the Steelers and their matchup, and we see a lot of offense in this game. We'll see, but ultimately, I still love Pickens right now. He's averaging 13 fantasy points per game. He's the wide receiver 20 on the season so far, been absolutely fantastic with Russell Wilson at the quarterback position. He could absolutely explode here in week 14. Up, let's take a look at Jacobe Meyers of the Las Vegas Raiders. This is a player that I really like going into the week, and he's been super solid over the past couple of weeks. If we look since week 8, he has double digits in every game except for week 11 against the Miami Dolphins. And in all those games, he's had 15.7 or more fantasy points. And this past week was the lowest one with 15.7 fantasy points, 11 targets, 6 catches, 97 receiving yards. So he's either had 97 or more receiving yards or a touchdown in every game since week 8, except for week 11 against Miami. And for the most part, he's come through against good defenses. The Miami game, not so much, but he's come through with double digits twice against Kansas City and once against Denver. And now he gets a smash matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He is a lock for double digits, and he's not even really the true number one pass catcher on this team. I think you could argue that's Brock Bowers, who has 10 or more targets in the last 3 games, while Myers has 10 or more targets in just 2 of the last 3 games, right? So the other nice thing here is that Aiden O'Connell looked pretty good this past week, and once again, that was against a better defense in the Chiefs. They're getting the Bucs this week, and this is a fantastic strength of schedule to wrap up the season if you are a Jacobe Meyers owner. Tampa Bay this week, Atlanta next week, then Jacksonville, then New Orleans. This is a smash rest of season strength of schedule for Jacobe Meyers. If you own him, play him this week. This is one of the best matchups you can ask for, and play him through the rest of the season. He is going to come through with a very solid floor, and he has a lot of upside on each and every week due to his matchups for the remainder of the fantasy season. This wide receiver I want to talk about is T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. And, I don't quite know what it is, but there seems to be concern around T. Higgins. And I think the main thing that I've seen from you guys is, well, the Bengals may not make the playoffs. They're probably not going to make the playoffs. They are technically in the playoff race, more than likely out of the playoff race at the same time. So people are worried because T. Higgins in this contract year, is he going to shut himself down, or are the Bengals going to shut this down? You got Burrow, you got Jamar Chase and Chase Brown. You got all these questions around 4 really incredible fantasy football studs on this team at wide receiver, running back, and quarterback. And I'm just not worried about it. And they're still in the playoff race here in week 14. So don't even worry about it yet if that's even going to be a thing. I don't think it's going to be a thing. But here in week 14, they're in the playoff race. There's no reason to have any concern going into this week whatsoever. And I talked about this in the wide receiver start sit video. If T. Higgins was fully healthy this whole season, he would be a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy football. He has absolutely smashed this season when healthy. The problem is he's missed 5 games on the season and had a week 12 bye week, right? So you've kind of missed that. And then his first game back, he only has 6.9 fantasy points. But outside of that, he's had 12 or more fantasy points in every single game. He's had 17.9 or more fantasy points in 4 of his starts as well. And in his last 3 starts, he's had 17.9 or more fantasy points. He has been fantastic. He has a touchdown in each of his last 3 games. He has 5 touchdowns in his last 5 games. He's had a fantastic season. He's just been injured, and he's been overshadowed by the phenomenal season that Jamar Chase has had, right? Being the wide receiver 1 in fantasy and the best wide receiver in the league this season, right? So, but Higgins has still been fantastic. This is a good matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. They've moved up a bit in rankings because they played some soft teams, but this is still a good matchup against this Cowboys team. The Bengals are on the road here, but I'm not worried about this whatsoever. This is one of those games where we're going to see, both of these teams put up a fight. Even if there's not a ton on the line on Monday Night Football, I guarantee you we're going to see offense in this game out of both teams because the Bengals have no defense and the Bengals offensively have a ton of firepower. So I think it's actually going to be a pretty good game. And Higgins is a lock. Every week he's been healthy, he has been a lock for me. Don't overthink this one. If you own T. Higgins, you have to start him. He's going to go nuclear in week 14. All right, let's go over one quarterback and one tight end very quickly. And I want to talk about Sam Darnold this week because I've been kind of ranting about Sam Darnold the past couple weeks, and he is the quarterback 8 in fantasy. He's averaging 18.1 fantasy points per game. He's given you single digits twice on the season, which wasn't good, and one of them was kind of head-scratching because it was against Jacksonville, and he had 5 interceptions in 2 weeks. He had 2 the previous week, and but whatever. You take away the game against the Jets, the overseas game. Week 1 was, still kind of exceeded expectations, but just 15 fantasy points. But outside of week 1, week 5 against the Jets, and week 10 against the Jags, he has 17.2 or more fantasy points in every single game. And 17.2, 18.2 in 2 games, 19.6 or more in every other game. He has a ton of games on the season, over 20 fantasy points. He's been fantastic, and he's been on a roll the past 3 weeks with 2 passing touchdowns in 3 straight games, 19.6 or more fantasy points in 3 straight games with a ceiling of 23.6 fantasy points. He's been on fire, and he gets a great matchup this week against the Atlanta Falcons, giving up the 25th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, and they've also been incredibly soft against opposing wide receivers. He's in a smash spot. He's a must-start quarterback on a weekly basis, and I'm tired of talking about it. I've been encouraging you guys to continue to roll with Sam Darnold. No reason to bench him. Week 10 was a little concerning, sure. Week 10 is far removed. He's been fantastic on the entirety of the season. You have to keep rolling with Sam Darnold if you own him, especially in a week where we have 6 teams on bye week. Sam Darnold is an extremely strong start in week 14. Last but not least, I want to talk about Jonnu Smith of the Miami Dolphins. This is another player the past 2 or 3 weeks we've just been calling an absolute must start. And I think the problem with owning Jonnu Smith is you got him off waivers. I doubt you drafted him and held him and all that, but you got him off waivers, and you probably have 1, maybe 2 other options at tight end that you also feel good about. So that's kind of made you ponder, should I start Jonnu Smith or this other player? And I've been saying it for more than 2 weeks now. You own Jonnu Smith, you just start him. He is in the must-start category at the tight end position. Averaging 12.2 fantasy points per game, he's moved up to the tight end 5 on the season. He has 21.3 or more fantasy points in 3 straight games. 8 or more targets in 3 straight games. 3 touchdowns in 3 straight games. And 11 or more targets in 2 of the past 3 games. We look at the rest of this team. That is more targets than Tyreek Hill. That is more targets than Devon Achane. And surprise, that is more targets than Jalen Waddle. He has the most targets of any pass catcher on this team over the past 3 weeks. You have to keep rolling with him. I know it's a tough matchup this week against the Jets. I'm not going to be worried about it. I'm starting Jonnu Smith at the tight end position no matter what. In this Dolphins team, getting kind of hot right now. I know they lost to Green Bay, but they have looked very good over the past couple weeks in comparison to the beginning of the season with Tua completely healthy, and Tua's looked very good over the past couple weeks for the most part as well. So if you own Jonnu Smith, just don't overthink it, especially in a week where we have 6 teams on bye. You can absolutely start Jonnu Smith this week. He's a smash start, and you can flex Jonnu Smith if you absolutely need to, or if you feel really good about your tight end 1 going into the week. So you own Jonnu Smith. He's a start this week, and on any given week, as we've seen over the past 3 weeks, he can go absolutely nuclear. And that'll do it for today's video. There are your must-start players that are set to go absolutely nuclear in Week 14. Make sure those players are not on your bench this week. As always, guys, I'm answering as many fantasy football questions as I can in the comment section down below. So if you guys need anything whatsoever, be sure to drop me a comment. I'll get back to you guys as soon as I possibly can. But most importantly, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel, because we're going to have every single thing you could possibly need week in and week out to help you guys dominate 2024 fantasy football. So make sure you are subscribed so that you don't miss out on any of the content. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.